Hello again, Year 11. So you've got my dulcet tones to listen to again for another 50 minutes. Here we go. Today we're looking at the demographic transition model. Obviously this is something you've learnt before. So it's a bit of a revision session over it, and also it's linked to economic development. That's what we're looking at. To start off, I want you to do this quick quiz. 9 questions. You don't need to write the answers down. You can just think them in your head, and when you think you've got them all, then you can unpause me. So 3, 2, 1, pause. Okay, the answers. GNI stands for Gross National Income. HDI stands for Human Development Index. They are both measures of development. GNI generally is wealth and money, and HDI is a combination of 3 measures. Number 3, why is it difficult to measure quality of life? Well, your answer should be because it's subjective. Everybody has a different opinion of what is a good quality of life. So it's quite hard to measure that because we can't really put numbers on it. Number 4, why is death rate not a very good indicator for measuring development? Well, the richest countries in the world actually have quite high death rates, and it's not because people are dying because of diseases and illnesses. It's because their populations are so old, like Japan, for instance, is a very elderly population, that it actually means that their death rate appears slightly higher. Therefore, it's not a very good indicator of measuring development, because often we associate high death rates with poorer countries. Number 5, would a developed country have a low or high birth rate? It would have a low birth rate. Number 6, would you expect a country with high infant mortality to be developed or not? I'd expect it to be not developed, because high infant mortality means that a lot of babies will die before their first birthday. Number 7, why would measuring air quality be a useful way of seeing how developed a country is? Well, I suppose less developed countries generally have poor air quality. They generally have more pollution. They're generally driving vehicles that pump out more pollution because they don't have to go through the same kind of MOT that all of our vehicles go through. So vehicles on the road will be poor quality, and they'll be using poor fuels and creating more pollution. And the governments themselves are probably not as tight on enforcing laws, and they also perhaps don't care as much. If they've got a population that's struggling to feed themselves 3 times a day, that's surely their priority above the environment. So generally, poor air quality would associate with less developed countries. Number 8, what does a country with a low life expectancy suggest about the country? Well, if people are dying fairly young, it suggests that the healthcare system is not particularly good. So that's what that would suggest. And number 9, why is using HDI as a way of measuring development more useful than GNI? Well, GNI just looks at one thing. It looks at gross national income per capita, whereas HDI looks at 3 things. It looks at years at school, life expectancy, and GNI. And so those 3 things look at really wealth, health, and education. And combining those 3 things together enables you to see whether countries are not only wealthy, but that the people are benefiting from that wealth. Let's move on. So today we're looking at the demographic transition model, and to break that down for you so you understand what it means, demographic is the study of population, so people. Transition means change, and a model is a graph. So we're looking at a graph that shows how population changes over time, and we're associating it with economic development as well. So this is a graph that shows the changes that a country's population goes through over time. The changes are closely linked with a country's level of development. That's why we're studying it. We're looking to see whether there is a link between these 2 things and how good the link is. There are 3 key terms that you need to make sure you know. Write them down if you don't. Birth rate, the number of live births per 1,000 people per year. In other words, if we took 1,000 women off the streets of childbearing age and pregnancy tested them, this would be highly unethical and we couldn't do it, but let's just say we did, then the number that are pregnant would give you the number of live births per 1,000. So let's just say 13 people were pregnant, then we would represent that as 13 per 1,000 per year. The same applies for death rates, number of deaths per 1,000 per year. And then we've got something called natural change. Now often it's natural increase, but we call it natural change in case the population is going down. It's calculated by taking the birth rate taking away the death rate, and then whatever's left over is your population change. So let's say we have 10 births and we have 8 deaths. We have a growth of 2. Equally, or similarly, if we have a birth rate of 10 and we have a death rate of 12, then actually we've got -2, so we'd actually have a fall in population in that instance. Okay, you're going to draw the DTM with me step by step. So you need a fresh page in your book, and I suggest you do this portrait actually, and you draw the model in the top half, and then you can make notes in the bottom half. You'll need a ruler, pencil, pen, and you'll need 3 colours, please. Try and find yourself 3 colours. If you can't and you don't have colours, then you could show a dashed line, could represent one colour, a block line could represent another colour, and then you could do some kind of other design, or maybe use a pencil for the other line. You need to draw that chart in front of you. It looks like this. So pause this slide until you have finished that task. So starting with stage 1, areas of the world that are in stage 1 would include places like rainforest tribes. There are no countries in stage 1 anymore. It tends to be very isolated communities like rainforest tribes. So where you've got your number 1, you can write down there rainforest tribes as an example of groups that are still in this stage. These groups are very isolated. They live in remote areas. An example would be parts of Indonesia, Brazil, Malaysia. There are small groups of people that just live separately with very little contact with the outside world. And they have, I'm going to choose a colour for birth rates here, and I want you to do the same. They have very high birth rates, it's around about 40 per 1,000 per year. So it's a really high birth rate. Now, underneath your column here, I'd like you to write some reasons why there is a really high birth rate. Reasons would include things like little or no access to contraception. Contraception is obviously man-made, and it's bought in clinics and hospitals and shops. And these rainforest groups, they live outside of the economic system, so they're not getting hold of things like that. Another reason for high birth rates is because they want plenty of children. The kind of hunter-gatherer lifestyles that they live, they require the children to help them hunt and to help them gather and to carry on the family name. They also have high birth rates because of high child infant mortality. So many children will die before their first birthday, and so they have more as an insurance, because ultimately it's the children that will look after them when they're old or when they are ill. So they have children as a kind of insurance. Other reasons, there might be religious beliefs that kind of ban the use of things like contraception, even if it was available to them. And just tradition. Traditionally, they have large families, so they carry on having large families. Now, you'll need to rewind this slide and note down those reasons for a high birth rate, please. And then we're going to look at the death rates in these areas. Death rates in these areas are also high. They'd be around about 24 per 1,000. So I'm going to draw my high fluctuating line again at the top here. Death rates are high because, again, they're isolated, so there's very little medical attention, there's very little medical knowledge. They probably don't, they possibly wouldn't trust medical systems. They use their own herbal remedies to try and deal with small illnesses like colds and coughs. And they have, like I say, their belief system is different to ours in the outside world. They you know, they're not using our medical systems. Their diets are also fairly limited. They'll eat what they can find. There'll be no trade. They won't have imports and exports of food, so the diets will be very limited as well. So that would lead to lots of people dying. The kind of lifestyles that they lead as well. Instead of hunting and gathering, be in a rainforest, they'd be climbing trees and chopping down wood, climbing trees to get to things like honey and nuts and fruits. And there'll be lots of deaths because it's dangerous. They won't be using any kind of safety equipment, and if they fall, that's it, it's curtains, isn't it? So very high death rate in these areas. And because we've got a high birth rate and a high death rate, the population would stay low. So I'm just going to draw a population line here that is just low and fairly balanced. Okay, then we move into areas in stage 2. Now an example in stage 2 would be places like Afghanistan. So you can go ahead and write in Afghanistan onto your model. To bear with me, it's very slow doing it like this on computer. So Afghanistan. Afghanistan is one of the poorest and least developed countries in the world. Its birth rate is also around about 39 per 1,000, and its death rate is falling. So we're going to go ahead with the birth rate. The birth rate is still high. We said about 39, so I'm going to draw my line showing that it's still high, the birth rate. For similar reasons to rainforest tribes, little access to contraception, children are wanted, they're needed, they help on the land. They may also earn some pennies in the informal sector, and children come along because people are used to having very large families, and it's against religious beliefs to even use contraception, even if it was there. Talking about things like sex is probably taboo. People just don't do it. They find it embarrassing. So therefore, babies get born. So birth rates remain high. But in this instance, death rates actually start to fall. So I'm going to have my death rate line coming down now, and you can do the same. So death rates fall through this stage, and again, I want you to pause this slide, have a think about why death rate falls in this stage, and when you think you've got the answers, unpause me. 3, 2, 1, pause. Okay, so death rates are now falling because people have got access to local health clinics. There might be vaccinations, which is jabs that are offered to newborn babies, so they're no longer dying of things like colds, coughs, flu, diarrhea, things that we can cure quite easily. They're now being vaccinated against, so that limits the number of deaths. The country has probably opened up to some form of trade as well, so there'll be imports of food and other products that they might need in order to give them a better quality of life. So because of this, they are no longer dying, or the death rate is falling anyway. It's still not perfect, but it's falling, and there we are. So you can see what's going to happen next. If our death rate is falling and less people are dying, but the birth rate remains high, then our population is going to rapidly increase, as you can see there. So you can add on your population line. Then we move to stage 3. A nice example of a country in stage 3 would be Nigeria. So go ahead and write Nigeria down in your stage 3 box. So Nigeria is a newly emerging economy, an NEE, and it's experiencing quite a lot of economic growth at the moment. The death rate is much lower than the birth rate, and the country's population is continuing to grow rapidly. The birth rate, however, is in fact falling. So we can start to show the birth rate now falling down to catch up with the death rate. The death rate has continued to fall and is now low. So birth rate is catching it up, it is now dropping. And the reason for this would be that now in countries like Nigeria, because their economy is rapidly developing, there are lots of industries being built, lots of factories being built, where people will work. So unlike Afghanistan, where probably 80% of the people in Afghanistan still work on land and they are farmers and they live a subsistence lifestyle, in Nigeria, the chances are that many people have moved from those rural areas to the cities to find work in factories because they want to improve their quality of life, and they can earn money, and they have an ideal of having a better quality of life and hopefully a better standard of living as well. Now, if you move to the cities and you get a job in factories, you no longer need to have 10 children to help you on the farms because you're no longer a farmer. So people start to not have children. They make choices. They decide to plan families and have much fewer children because children are now seen to be a little bit of a hindrance, a little bit of a burden to you, so they stop having them. So the birth rate falls quite quickly. Again, the death rate is low for all the reasons that we gave for Afghanistan. That then takes us to stage 4 of the DTM. Country in stage 4 would be somewhere like the USA, United States of America. USA is one of the most developed countries in the world. There's good quality healthcare, means that the death rates are low, so it'd be around about 8 per 1,000. Women tend to have very small families. They choose to study, they choose to follow careers, therefore the birth rate stays low. Population doesn't really grow. If it grows at all, it will be growing because of migration. So we can show our birth rate dropping now to very low levels. And the same with our death rate. Death rate's very low levels. Okay, so that would be the USA. Important thing here is that, like I said, that the birth rate is low because of women following careers. That's the main reason why it stays low in countries in stage 4. People like me that have gone into teaching and are not married and don't have children, and if I was to have children, that would seriously impact on my career because I wouldn't be able to easily do both. I wouldn't be able to stay at home and be a stay-at-home mum and work at the same time. So people choose, and many women now are falling into careers or choosing careers over children. Then we get to stage 5, and a nice example for stage 5 would be a country like Germany, and actually many European countries. So you can go ahead and put Germany in your final box. Okay, and in countries such as Germany, we have a very low death rate. So I'm just going to continue to do my low death rate, which is fluctuating. They fluctuate because of there'll be periods of time where there'll be slightly more deaths. Some years where there'll be more deaths than others. For example, sometimes we have really bad winters where it's extremely cold, so we have a few more deaths that year, or there might be a flu outbreak, so we have a few more deaths that year. Or like, for instance, at the moment we have there might be epidemics in areas. I mean, at the moment it's a pandemic, obviously, but under normal circumstances, there may be epidemics in some areas which lead to slightly high deaths some years and then better years. That's why it fluctuates. And medical knowledge is improving, research and development is improving, so the death rate is really is quite low. Birth rate, however, continues to decline, and it actually drops now below the death rate. So it's continuing to go down, and now we've got a definite birth rate that's lower than death rate. So what we would have, we go back to our population line, obviously our population has rapidly grown throughout stages 2 and 3. It's then become even in stage 4 because births and deaths are both low. But now our population actually starts to go down to reflect this, that we've got more deaths than we have births. And that really concludes the demographic transition model. What you need to get from this is all countries should pass through these stages as they develop. And so this model is directly linked to economic development. What it's telling you is countries or areas with very, very low economic development have high birth and death rates for the reasons given. And as countries become wealthier and they're able to invest in things like healthcare, then the death rate will fall. And as people's lifestyles change and they move from doing hard work that involves their bodies and hard labour like farming, as soon as they develop away from that and start to develop their industries where they can earn more money, the birth rates will also fall to follow because children are no longer needed. So all of this is directly linked to wealth. And then you get to the final stages, obviously, with our richest countries that have both low birth and death rates, and actually the birth rate continues to fall to less than 2. Obviously, if you want the population to stay exactly even, then you and your partner need to have 2 children. Those 2 children will replace you when you die. If you've got less than 2, if you're having less than 2, then the population will fall. And currently in many European countries, it's like 1.8, 1.9, so it's actually less than 2. So that's the DTM. What I'd like you to do, please, is I'd like you to put these 4 letters, A, B, C, D, and E, onto the demographic transition model. So you decide what stage you think they should go in, please. Do that now, and then move on for the answers. Okay, so letter A you should have put in stage 5. It's post-industrial, it's got a very elderly population, low births, low deaths. The birth rate is actually lower than the death rate, which is why you should put that in stage 5. B is a Middle Eastern country whose economy relies on subsistence agriculture. A very high birth rate, but a falling death rate. You should have put that in stage 2. Country C is a North American high-income country. It's got a higher birth rate than death rate. It's a high-income developed country. You should have put that in stage 4. D lives in small pockets away from the influence of the outside world. Very, very high birth rate and incredibly high death rate as well. You should put that in stage 1. And finally, E is an African industrial country, so it's industrializing. It has a high birth rate. It has a falling death rate. You should put that in stage 2. Okay, moving on. So each stage can be associated with its level of development. So A, or stage 1, would be the pre-industrial societies. So they have not got any economy. Stage 1 is totally outside of the economy. They don't earn money, they don't need money because they live hunter-gatherer lifestyles. B would be a very, very low income country. So like you said, Afghanistan. C, a newly emerging economy like Nigeria. D, a high income country with an industrial focus. That means a work focus, so people in careers and earning money. And finally, E, a high income country with a very aging population like Germany, like Japan, like Britain, like a lot of countries in the EU. So it's directly associated with levels of development. So let's just question for a moment how strong the link is between the demographic transition model and economic development. Well, almost a quarter of Russian men do not survive beyond their mid-50s, in part due to lifestyle choices, despite the fact that Russia has a continuing economic development. We should really suggest that Russia would be at stage 3 on the demographic transition model. So it should have a fairly a low death rate, and it should have a low birth rate. But in fact, we've got a lot of men, a quarter, dying in their mid-50s or before their mid-50s. That doesn't really fit the model. It says in part that's due to lifestyle choices. A lot of men drink a lot of alcohol, especially vodka, which is obviously a poison. It's one of the reasons why they die young. So that doesn't really fit the model because they should be in stage 3, yet the death rate is actually quite high. Let's look at the next one. Death rates in many rural areas of sub-Saharan Africa have remained higher than may have been expected given the economic development of the countries in the region. And this is due to the prevalence and the impact of HIV and AIDS. So actually in stage 2, we should see the death rate fall. The birth rate remains high, but the death rate should fall. But in these areas, the death rate is actually staying high, and that's because of AIDS and HIV. So again, it doesn't really fit the model of stage 2. Then we move on to Japan. Japan's economy has stagnated for nearly 2 decades now, that's 20 years, yet it continues to see a slump in its birth rate and the most aging population of the world. So Japan would be in stage 5 because its birth rate is very, very low and falling. Its birth rate is lower than its death rate. However, we've got an economy that is stagnated. It isn't growing. And what we said earlier is that as you move through the stages on the DTM, the economy continues to grow. It grows and gets larger and larger. But in this instance, Japan's economy isn't. It's not really done anything for 20 years. And that's in part to the fact that there are so many old people that are retired and they're not earning. So the economy isn't growing. So again, that doesn't really fit the model at stage 5. And then finally, let's think about migration. Migration impacts can influence natural increase depending on the age, fertility, and social attitudes and gender of those arriving as immigrants and those leaving as emigrants. So in some areas of the world, like in, let's say the United States of America, the influence of migrants coming in that may well be young, in their 20s and 30s, they are meeting boyfriends and girlfriends, they're settling down, they're having children, but they're actually immigrants. They're migrants coming into the country, and therefore they are actually causing a rise in population. in stage 4. And actually, we said earlier that stage 4, the population sort of steadies. So again, it goes against the model. So what you need to remember is the model is just a model. It suggests all countries pass through the 5 stages, and that as they do, their economies grow, and that they see changes with their birth and death rates. And for the most part, it is true. However, when we talk about the link between DTM and economic development, we have to have caution. We have to say, well, actually, there are some examples where these places do not fit the pattern because of other factors. So here's a question. To what extent are economic development and the DTM linked? Before, you are going to have a go at answering this, but not yet. Before you do, I want to show you 3 student answers. I want you to read each one, and I want you to mark them and see how close you get to the actual answers. So 1 to 3 marks will be a very basic answer. 4 to 6 marks will be a clear answer with at least 2 developed points. 7 to 9 marks, a detailed answer with at least 2 well-developed points, and a bit of balance in there. And they must have addressed the question, to what extent? And obviously you can't do any underlining because everything's on the screen, but I do want you to pause the slide, read through the answer, think about which bits are getting marks, which bits are irrelevant, which bits are incorrect and need to be crossed out, and judge what grade you would give it. Here we go. Pause this, decide what you're going to give it, and then unpause to hear my explanation. Okay. The first sentence doesn't add anything to the answer. It's just saying that there is a link. Then they say, you can tell this because all the rich countries have low birth rates, like Japan. Well, that's true, but that isn't really explaining the link. It's just stating that wealthy countries have low birth rates. Another thing is that all the poor countries have high birth rates. That's true, because they can't afford contraception. In part, that's true. So a good example would be Brazil. That's not true. Brazil isn't a poor country. So there's a statement there that's incorrect. There's 2 statements that are true, but they haven't really explained the link at all. So this answer out of 9 is likely to get a mark. A mark for using some knowledge that's correct and naming a country example like Japan, but there is no real link. They have said that there's a link, but they've not really gone on to explain it. So 1 to 2 marks is what this answer will get out of 9. Let's look at the next one. Again, pause this and then unpause for my explanation. Okay, the DTM and economic development are strongly linked together. That's the opening statement. They're saying to what extent. HICs such as Germany in stage 5 have very low birth and death rates and falling population as shown in the model. Birth and death rates are low because people follow careers and healthcare is advanced, showing the link to the economy. That's nice because they've showed the link to the economy. NEEs such as Nigeria in stage 3 have falling birth rates and falling death rates and a growing population which fits the model. Okay, remember we're showing the links to the model. Tribes in stage 1 have no economy and have high birth and death rates which fits the model. In conclusion, you can see that countries fit the model. The richer they are, the lower the birth and death rates because of development. Okay, this answer has not much explanation. It's stating that countries fit the model. It's naming examples. The best bit was at the beginning when they talked about Germany, because they not only did they say that Germany fit the model, but they explained why birth and death rates are low. They explained the link to the economy, which is that people follow careers and healthcare is advanced, and that's because the economy has grown. It's improved those things, which has meant that birth and death rates have fallen. So that's the only time really when they've explained. Otherwise they've just found countries to fit the model, and they've just stated that there is a very strong link. They've not thought about any of the exceptions. I would hold this answer to level 2, which would be 4 to 6 marks. I'd probably go in the middle, 5, and because there's a lack of explanation, I'd probably say 4 or 5 marks. I would give that. Mind you, they have concluded. I'd give it 5 at best. Let's move on to the last one. Pause this, and then again have another look. There's a strong relationship between the DTM and economic development, but there are also many exceptions. That's nice because it shows that there's going to be balance in this answer. HICs such as Germany in stage 5 have very low birth and death rates, and a falling population is shown in the model. Birth and death rates are low because people follow careers, and healthcare is advanced, showing high economic development. So that's the same start, and it's good, it's explained. However, this is nice. However, Japan is also an HIC and in stage 5 of the DTM, but its economy has been stagnant for 2 years. So there we go, we're showing that that goes against the model. NEs such as Nigeria in stage 3 have falling birth rates and falling death rates and a growing population, which fits the model. And then they explain here, look, as their economies have developed, people have moved to cities for work in industries, resulting in falling birth, and improved healthcare has lowered death rates. There we go. So they've linked why, they've explained how the economy has resulted in that change. On the other hand, Russia is also an NEE with a developing economy, yet the death rates remain higher than you might expect because of early male death. So it doesn't fit the model. So they've given another example of where it doesn't fit. The DTM also takes no account of migration, which has a huge impact on the growth of both population and the economy. Overall, the relationship between the DTM and economic development is very strong. However, it's not a perfect correlation as shown. Yes, this mark would get you 9 marks because they've given balance. They've said where countries do fit the model and why the richer the country, the lower the birth and the death rates. And they have also given the exceptions where countries do not fit the model. So they really have decided that there's a very strong link, but there are some exceptions. Okay, you've guessed it. I'd like you to have a go at the question. I don't want you to copy the answer from the previous slide. I want you to have a go at writing your own answer up, please. You need to spend at least 10 or 11 minutes on it. You need to begin your answer with one of those statements. I know which one I would go for, but you've got to make that judgment. And in the orange box is some help. So once you've chosen one of those bullet points, you then go through the help section there, and you should write up a really, really good answer. You can then submit that to your teacher for evidence to go towards your predicted grade in the summer.